It's mental health awareness, baby. Ooh, alright, never mind. Hang on. Should we try that again? I don't know how that sounded on y'all's end. But like I saw that my oh my gosh, this is such a cursed start. But I mean, like why wouldn't it be? I saw that my audio, at least on my end, stuttered. I don't know if it was like that for everybody else, but I guess I will find out. I guess I'll find out when I edit this later. Um, but hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Girl Next Door podcast. I'm your host Sean, aka your number one source of fashionably late but occasionally great pop culture takes. Today we are talking about mental health. For Mental Health Awareness Month. I have it written down right in front of me. I don't know why I stuttered. But before we get into it, just want to let y'all know I stream every single episode of these on Twitch at twitch.tv/Girl Next Door podcast on Mondays, Wednesdays, and sometimes Fridays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So come on through and join the live chat. Let's just vibe. Okay. Now that I was able to get all of that out, it is hot as fuck in here. I'm hoping you can't hear my fan going on in the background, but if you can, somebody please let me know. I turned it all the way down. I had it on full blast before I unmuted my mic. But I was just like, okay, yeah, no, I don't want to like stress people out when when they come in if they just hear my fan going. I have my I do have a shit, what's it called? It's a sound insulator sort of like around my mic right now, but I don't think that it's not perfect. Like I can still when I go back in to edit and everything, I can still hear my my PC kind of not having a great time trying to run everything that I want to run, because ultimately this is not a streaming PC. I get it. I feel like I've said it a million times at this point, so it's probably not even worth mentioning anymore. But because of that, it's just like I know it's not perfect. If you hear stuff in the background, like that's why I have my fan going, I have my computer struggling, and I also have my window open, so you might hear stuff on the street. I'm kind of lucky enough where I live, to where everything does kind of just stop past 9 p.m., which a lot of people hate, and that's fair because it makes this town very boring. But it is very nice when you're trying to record, specifically record a podcast. But so, even though I said normally I stream Mondays and Wednesdays, I recognize that today is a Thursday. I don't know if anybody saw my tweet or my Instagram story. None of this matters if you're watching this in the future, but I was supposed to stream yesterday. Today it's Thursday. Happy almost Friday, y'all. But ironically, I was having a little bit of a mental health sort of like issue, I guess. I'm not gonna get like super into it. It's not like serious, or I know I'm just like, oh my god, we're gonna be, transparent about mental health and talk all about, mental health and sort of like my history with it and how I approach it. But at the same time, I'm just like, privacy is nice, and I think the only thing that's really important to know is that things are good now. I felt like this is a topic that's so important to me and near and dear to my heart that I feel like if I'm not giving like my my 100%, I guess that I'd be a little bit disappointed with the after product. But with all that being said, I think like the main thing that I was really concerned about when I knew that I just wasn't sort of in like a great headspace yesterday, that I was just like, oh god, I don't want this stream to turn into me like whining about my mental health or something, because to me that doesn't really feel like my goal. I don't really want to just only talk about me when like we discuss mental health, even though this is something that like I do want to get a little bit more like honest and like vulnerable about, because I'm fortunate enough to be in a position, I think anyway, where I've had a lot of opportunities for self-work and becoming more capable of approaching maybe the more difficult subjects in my life in a way that I feel comfortable sharing, um, in case like maybe it like resonates with somebody for whatever reason, whether it's like a similar experience to mine or whether it's just being able to relate to it on some sense. Um, for I guess for starters, if we're doing sort of like a vague framework for what I wanted to do with this stream, um, which might, I mean, like as per usual, I expect to sort of go off on tangents every now and then, because that's just kind of my communication style at this point. Um, but I guess I'll just like start out. My sort of journey, I guess, into becoming more aware of my mental health and sort of taking it more seriously started actually, I believe it was my freshman year of college. I I think I've talked about it probably before, but if I haven't, I'm just gonna sort of quickly say that, just like, hey, I support education, like 100%, obviously, um, but I think a lot of people, myself included, would really have benefited from just like knowing that, like, hey, college straight out of high school, like the year after graduating is like not for everybody. um and I found that out for myself relatively quick. I had like a good first semester of classes overall, but I think I was just sort of like riding the adrenaline a little bit of like having, like my own freedom and like having an entirely new group of friends, and then like realizing this, like, oh, college isn't as scary as I thought it was gonna be, so I can actually like enjoy myself and not be super riddled with anxiety basically. And then things started getting a little bit a little bit more tricky as the year went on. I actually in a way have to thank the person I was dating at the time. We're not together anymore, but we had gotten together there that same year, and he sort of encouraged me to sort of look into, I guess, like my mental health a little bit more seriously. I've been like aware of certain things like in the past, but I don't have a direct family history to be able to draw from, of like, being able to look at, like, did either of my parents struggle with depression? Did they struggle with anxiety? Is there like the genetic component that I can be looking at with that? I don't really have that as just because of the nature of adoption, but or mine specifically, I guess. I know everybody can have a completely different experience, and that's great. But yeah, so after there's a without getting too into it, there was it wasn't like a full-on mental breakdown, but it definitely was not a good time. I just sort of needed to talk to somebody, and I knew that, like, I at the very least wanted a diagnosis. I had other people around me that were dealing with mental health stuff as well, but so like the lexicon was around, or was beginning to be around me more, now that I was around people that had more diverse experiences with it, because it was kind of just like a thing that, at least at my high school, wasn't talked about a whole lot. Like, unless you were very much on like it seemed like if the only times that people would ever really talk about mental health, at least like in the major circles that I was in, it was usually related to a tragedy that like happened with one of our classmates. And obviously, when I say this, I don't say this to take away from that traumatic event, because it was terrible for like everybody, and I can only imagine what they were going through and what their family was going through. But because of that, there really was just this this expectation, I think, that was set up with a lot of us, that when it came to talking about mental health, that it was only worth talking about if it got that bad, or if it was like, if you had so much emotional trauma or baggage or dealing with like extremes at the time, that was really the only time that was like worth reaching out for help, is like those dire circumstances. And the reality is like, no, this is a thing that it's you don't have to quote unquote have anything seriously wrong with you to check in with yourself and maybe seek professional help. That was definitely a thing that I wish I had been a little bit more aware of earlier on, just because we probably would have found some things a little bit sooner, and I would have been able to explain certain things to the people around me, and then to myself as well. To sort of be very brief and hopefully not too glib about it, but it's just, I mean, I've gotten used to just kind of saying it. I struggle with like major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety, bipolar disorder, and ADHD, which I know ADHD is like sort of in like a weird camp for a lot of people, where they're just like, it falls under mental health care or mental health, but is it like a mental health issue? Is it like a neurological thing? Is it, you know, like whatever? And then you open all these other conversations of like, okay, well, with some of these other disorders, that's also brain chemistry things, so like, shouldn't those be considered under your umbrella? I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I'm not fully educated on like the history of like all of that, but I know that there are certain spaces that do feel like that's like a thing worth bringing up. And considering how tied I feel personally my ADHD is to the rest of sort of my mental health package, I guess, I feel like it's worth bringing up. But I know I feel like I should throw that disclaimer out there that like there are lots of different schools of thought about it. I'm not going to pretend that I'm the deciding factor whether or not it falls under this umbrella or not. But I think if I had sort of at least known about like the ADHD stuff like a little bit more, I might have been I honestly think my work ethic in high school, granted it wasn't bad, but it was very, I mean, it was definitely not bad. I was like salutatorian at like my high school, but it really did sort of create a very unhealthy cycle, I guess, mentally, when it did come to like, I know this is like sort of a maybe a bit of a stereotypical example, but I was really bad at procrastinating. And I also really struggled sort of, I again, like I get that this is just reading down like the laundry list of symptoms, I guess, or sort of shared experiences with people that sort of deal with these experiences through like adolescence and even earlier, that just might not be aware of it, like would be struggling to pay attention in class. And it was a frustrating experience because it's just like, it's not that I didn't know what ADHD was, because I had friends that were diagnosed with ADHD, but because I wasn't, and I didn't know that it didn't connect with me that like, oh, that could be a thing that I could like be checked out for. I just interpreted it as me being a bad student, which again wasn't even true, because my grades were fine. I did all of my assignments on time, but it was still that like that loop in like your brain or whatever, that very much was fueled by anxiety, that did sort of play into that a little bit, or a lot of it actually. I had, whether I realized it or not, I did sort of live in this sort of I don't want to say self-hatred loop through high school, because that kind of like feels a little bit dramatic, and also because I feel like most teenagers deal with like a little bit of self-hate at some point. But but it was definitely like I think as I've gotten older and I've learned more about myself and sort of my mental health, I've become like more forgiving about certain things, and I'm starting to use more understanding language around myself, I guess, because I was fully in the camp of like, if I'm struggling to do this assignment because of attention issues, it's because I'm lazy, or it's because I don't care about things enough, but I should, but I'm not taking it seriously enough. And then that's like that sort of like anxiety thought spiral that that turns you into thinking that you're a terrible person when you're not, because it's literally it's fucking math homework. You'll be okay. But I don't know. I feel like I guess I can also probably tie another experience. That's like a lot of like my anxiety, on top of like the fact that I was a very socially anxious person, which I just thought I was shy. Which like is still true. I do consider myself a shy person. But there's there were added layers to it, I guess, that that I was just like, oh, like I must be just like really really shy and really really socially awkward, and I don't know why, and it's like, am I just not good at peopling? Which I guess these things aren't mutually exclusive. I can still be terrible at peopling but also be dealing with a lot of social anxiety disorder, or generalized anxiety, but like in social settings. But I think like another thing that sort of definitely I became more aware of, it definitely manifested like a lot in like sort of kind of late childhood, actually. I definitely like realized I was like dealing with some subsides of depression probably around, I always kind of like, whenever I talk to like my therapist about, or like sort of introduce myself to a new therapist or mental health care worker, if they have questions about like, you know, when did I start seeing these symptoms, like, you know, is this like a reoccurring pattern in your life, is it like something that just sort of like happens around certain events, I can trace it back to when I was 12. And it wasn't like from like any like the thing that always like threw me off was just like, because my understanding of depression was that like, oh, like something really really traumatic has to happen to you for you to be like clinically depressed. It can't just be a thing that happens, you know. And for me that moment was ironically it was Christmas. I don't want to turn this. I don't want this to turn into a whiny thing. I swear it's not, though, because I think it's kind of funny in hindsight. Because it really should have been, if I'd known in that moment that like, oh hey, you know, therapy's a thing. This could be like a sign of something. I might have become a little bit more well-adjusted as a teenager, but that's okay. But I just sort of like the happy chemicals were not working that Christmas, and it wasn't like, oh, like the gifts I got were like lame, or it wasn't like, oh, I'm just not feeling like the holiday spirit. I was just like, oh my god, everything just like sucks, and I don't know why I feel like disconnected from everything, and like, am I just being like ungrateful? Am I being like a party pooper? Am I like, I don't understand what's like happening to my brain right now, but like I just want to like I don't even want to come downstairs and like open presents with people or be social. I just want to like hibernate basically. I would find out years later that that is an indication of something on a deeper level. But yeah, that's always a fun story to relay to to the like therapist, but I'm surprised it's like not like an entirely uncommon one for people that sort of experience or begin to like sort of show signs of like dealing with like major depressive disorder like in childhood. um, is it is usually it can be sort of like linked with holidays, and it's because of that. Christmas is like, as much as I love like Christmas from like an aesthetic standpoint, and everything, and I do very much love that time of the year. It's kind of it is up there holidays wise for me. um it's still sort of like a time where I definitely like I check in with myself a lot more. I see my therapist relatively frequently, like regardless, but I am like a little bit more in tune with that during that time of the year. I mean, there's a variety of reasons. It doesn't just have to be like Christmas is like a difficult time of the year, which it is for a lot of people, but it just kind of just generally, winter is not a fun time in the Northeast, way away in the Northeast. Yeah, because there's just like there's no sun. You're indoors all the time because of like the snow, and it's just like freaking cold. Um, so you know, that's just kind of like a good time to be like in tune with yourself anyway, and like making sure that like, you know, even if you're not getting like enough sun, like make sure you're taking like some supplements for like vitamin D or which is something that I still do regardless of what time of year it is. But um but yeah, so that's I guess that's, is that the full story, I guess. Well, I will say that the bipolar part and the ADHD, that was diagnosed like much later than like my depression and my anxiety, because that has been like within the past year and a half. Because I mean, look, I feel like a lot of people, interestingly enough, it's like, what a surprise, a global pandemic might make might make people depressed, or might make people care more about their mental health. That was definitely like the case for me, as like somebody who was already pretty regularly seeing a therapist, and like, you know, visiting a psych, and sort of keeping up with medications, because that's just sort of the way that I've decided to approach my personal mental health. It still was a little bit of like a wake up call to be like, okay, well, maybe there's something more here. We've got plenty of time to figure it out. So, you know, like most of us dealing with this onset of global trauma, I sort of upped my sessions a little bit more. I ended up going to a new therapist. Actually, there wasn't anything wrong with like my previous one, but per se, it's just I kind of needed a new change in like perspective, and that's opened the door a lot to like other conversations I don't think I would have had with that first person. And that's sort of the it's why I mean, I support therapy kind of regardless. If you're able to afford one, or your insurance covers it, or you live in an area that is like conducive to it, I recognize that it's like a great privilege to be able to see a therapist as consistently as I have been able to, and that I was able to find one relatively soon, because I know plenty of people have been on wait lists for months at this point. I still very much advocate for it. I think it's great. I think even if you don't, I don't know, my voice just cracked. I think even if you don't like have like a major mental health disorder or anything, it's still good to have sort of that, you know, that outside perspective of you that like you don't have this sort of interpersonal attachment to, I guess. Because I'll be honest, as in the past anyway, I've been a little bit better about setting up personal boundaries. But in the past, I've definitely sort of thrown myself into the shoes of like, you know, the therapist friend a little bit. Not that I was qualified to. I don't know why I thought I was. You know, the one that's just like there to like listen to people when they're really going through stuff at 2 a.m. And look, it gets to the point where you can love your friends like literally to the ends of the earth, but it's not your job to be their therapist. It's your it's your place to be their friend. And I know friendships look different to everybody, and everybody has like a different dynamic that goes on. But my therapist actually said pretty recently that even though I'd already maybe come to this conclusion, I'd never been able to articulate it in this way, and it was like, oh shit, that's like great. Is that like, your position as like a friend or a sibling or whatever, that's like sort of invaluable and super personal to you. And if you're sort of taking on the hat of like, a professional role that can be done by lots of people, to the point where it keeps that friendship or that relationship with somebody from being enjoyable, like it's kind of it is a loss in a way. And it's not always the other person's fault for maybe not recognizing that they might be crossing some boundaries. I mean, especially if you're not capable of setting them and being able to establish them and fortify them when you can. And it's a difficult position for lots of people to be in, is because obviously as a friend, like you want to be able to support them emotionally, like whether it's like a friend or a sibling or a partner, like, or whoever. If you love these people, like in your mind you tell them that like you'll do like, or you tell yourself that you do like literally anything for them. And if that means being on the phone like that early in the morning to sort of like, help calm somebody down, that it's just like, yeah, that's great. You should like do that, right? And some people are better equipped to deal with that than others. Some people and some people like struggle with that a bit. I personally earlier in my life may have had a little bit more of the vitality, I guess, to take on that kind of role a bit, like as a friend. But as I've gotten older, I've sort of and have had to look more inward towards my own issues, I guess. It's it's sort of like, I have to decide that the friend that I want to be and the things that I value in our friendship don't have to circle around being on red alert, basically. And that means like, look, it's still great to be able to turn to these people or to be turned to. It feels great to be needed, I will admit. In the same way that it's nice to be supported, but when you sort of enter this space where you feel like you're such a burden, like that's sort of like the toxic other side of that situation, is sort of feeling like, oh my god, I'm taking up too much space, and every time I ask this from somebody, I must be like annoying the shit out of them, and then I'm like, oh, I'm like the emotional vampire of the group. Like, that's definitely a thing I've had to think about a lot. And I feel like therapy sort of doesn't necessarily eradicate that anxiety, but definitely reduces it, to know that like there's somebody that I pay to listen to my shit that doesn't have that level of context and like stakes in my life, to where I might be like embarrassed to tell them this, or like worrying that you might not see me the same way as a friend if you see me like this. I'm thankfully I haven't really been in what I consider crisis mode in a couple of years at this point. I haven't had a panic attack in like 2 or 3 years, I think, which is great. I used to have them a lot. They're not fun. They make my face hurt so bad. And I always like describe it to people as like, because my face is scrunching up so much, it feels like when you sit on your hand for too long, it starts feeling staticky, but it's like your entire face, and then like you can't breathe on top of it. It's like, ew, gross. I hate that. Um, so it's great that I haven't had to deal with that for a bit. It doesn't mean that my anxiety has like completely gone away, but I think, you know, the medications that I'm on have been like very helpful. I think sort of finding things that soothe me are very helpful as well. I mean, it's like probably a little bit self-explanatory when you think of like a self-soothing activity or coping mechanism. It's just kind of about finding healthy ones, you know, and like ones that don't create new anxieties. And that kind of comes down to like how like what your propensity to codependency is, and that is definitely a thing that I've had to take into consideration a lot in the past. And that's a, and that and I'd say that that's a thing that people are all over the board when it comes to that, and I'm glad that there's there's people I can pay to sort of sort that out and sort of map out a solution if they see like a problem with like I'm not responding well to this, you know, kind of thing. So I think personally that because I benefited a lot from therapy period, but I definitely benefited a lot from getting a change in perspective by switching therapists. And it's not always, it's, you know, it's not always a bad thing when you do. It doesn't always have to be brought on by something. It doesn't always have to be like a it doesn't always have to be like a personal attack of like, oh, this person like sucks, or this person like isn't doing what they need to be doing. It's just like sometimes you outgrow therapists, or sometimes you just need something different for a different thing in your life. Like that's the thing about, you know, being a human being, is that you're so individual on your own that likewise your healthcare, well, your mental health care and your ability to be a therapist is going to be so different from like another person's style. Even if you're going, I mean, a bunch of people could go from like the same textbook and they'd still practice very differently. So I sort of always like to tell people if and when they start therapy, to be open-minded and to understand that like not every therapist is going to be the perfect fit every time, but at the same time, like you'll know if this isn't the right person. It's not always because they suck. It's not always because you're completely incompatible with this person and it's like your fault or it's their fault. It's like it can just be like, that's just, it is what it is. And that can be a difficult thing to sort of grapple with if you live somewhere where there isn't really a lot of availability, of course. I know that I sort of have people in my life who have been struggling to find professionals that can help them within my area, just because of how backed up things were. I know definitely in the beginning of the pandemic, yeah, great, you know, I'm grateful that people were sort of self-aware enough to seek out professional help like they did. But there was like such a large influx at the beginning of the pandemic that I lucked out that I was already with somebody, and well, not only that I was already with somebody, but I was able to do sort of a smooth transition to a different therapist at a time where lots of people were just struggling to get on somebody's list. Again, very grateful for that. I recognize my privilege. But if you also have that privilege or that opportunity, I wholly recommend it. It might not work for everybody. It might not be, you might have a completely different relationship to it, like, as well. Like I see my therapist every 2 weeks, just because I like the frequency of it. Some people can go for months without seeing their therapist, and that works perfectly fine for them. Some people see them infrequently and only sort of set up appointments with them around certain um, pockets of their life if they like know that they need the extra support, and I think that's perfectly valid as well. um Ooh, that was a very loud car. I don't know if anybody heard that. Excuse me. I've been dealing with a lot of energy stuff pretty recently, related to my sleep schedule. I think that's like sort of like another big thing that I definitely not overestimated. I underestimated when it came um, to your mental health. Is like, hey, get some fucking sleep. Maybe drink some water, you stupid bitch. um, I mean, I still suck at that sometimes, to be honest. I recognize that I don't have a great sleep schedule. It used to be a lot better. I feel like I was pretty disciplined um in college, and then for like maybe like the first couple of years like after I left. But something completely flipped when I traveled overseas, and I came back and I was just thinking like, oh, like my sleep schedule is just messed up because of jet lag. I'll get over it eventually. And I just kind of like sat with the same sleep schedule for like the same hello for the next several years. I'm just like, yeah, no, this needs to this needs to stop. Um because ultimately, like, I definitely run into the predicament of like sad boy hours. There are certain periods of time at night where my emotions are just very heightened, and I just know that there are never going to be any productive conversations about mental health. Um, and I want to say that's actually backed by studies, but if I do, if I do, I'm gonna have to like Google like the article that I read that said it, and that's just going to be a whole thing. So you know, I won't go on the record and say that, but I'm going to do the very internet thing of saying like, oh, I read somewhere that human beings are more emotional at night. It's like sort of it's a remnant of a evolutionary trait or whatever, being hyper vigilant when we were like not living in a modern society. But again, I don't know if that's true or not. I just read that like forever ago. So not me spreading misinformation on the internet. I mean, I'll look that up later. Well, I guess I can look it up now. I have my phone out and I don't really have like that much structure in my life. No, I mean in the stream. But while I look that up, I know a question that I posed on Twitter and Instagram was I want to know sort of what your favorite interpretation or piece of work that addresses mental health issues sort of does it really well. And that's like sort of like, okay, like, is it like a movie, is it a TV show, is it an anime, is it a book, is it a song, is it a whatever, you know? What do you think really encapsulates that any sort of like experience or any sort of like diagnosis or whatever, in a way that you feel like is like really like speaks to you and feels really really accurate, or at the very least well researched. I know that this might be maybe not so easy to pinpoint if like you know you don't struggle with a specific mental health issue, but at the same time, like, I feel like there's plenty of accessible works that are out there that have at least brought awareness to mental health in a responsible way that a lot of us have probably consumed at one point in time. There's no right or wrong answers. There might be some, but for the sake of discussion, I'm not, you know, I'm definitely not gonna debate you on it. I can think of some stinkers, but this stream isn't about calling out bad mental health representation, because that was the other night. Let me stop. I, while we are chewing on that, please leave, if you want to answer it, leave it in the comments, put it in the chat. If you don't feel like sharing, that's cool too. I'll share mine in a second. I'm just sort of going through my my little Google search. Okay, so there are studies about it. Although I'm seeing different reasonings for it. I was thinking more of like the chemical level, but there are other there are other great points though, of like it's like the lack of distraction, so you're just you're just alone with your thoughts. Ooh, here's one about impulsivity being increased at night. I'm like skimming it though to see if it's like bullshit first though, because I don't want to read it out loud on stream and then it's like wrong. Ooh, okay, maybe okay. So it's not it's not wrong, but I don't really want to bring up. I'm trying to keep this as a trigger-free stream. to be honest, so I'm trying to stay away from like the. I mean, there's a number of reasons why. One is because I'm not sure what I'm allowed to talk about on Twitch, and two, because I want this to be accessible overall. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to. It doesn't mean that I'm like I want to stray too far away from certain things, because ultimately something that I did bring up in the in an umbrella discussion that I did kind of want to talk about, like sort of was the overlap with in like the role that collective queer trauma sort of has to play in like mental health, which might be obvious to a lot of people, but I still think is worth talking about. I'm gonna segment that off into like a separate part of the stream personally, because I would like to put maybe a light trigger warning in front of it. Again, I want to keep this as accessible as possible, and because of that I'm not going to be talking about self-harm, I'm not going to be talking about suicide too in depth, outside of maybe some statistics, but I just think that like, while I think that there were great podcasts and great pieces of media in general that address that very well and very and that it is very much a real part of discussing mental health and being really honest with it, it's just kind of not the energy that I want to cultivate tonight. I know that probably sounds kind of douchey, but that's just sort of where I'm at with it. If somebody wants to bring it up like in chat and like has questions about it or wants to talk about their experience, like that's fine. I just might try to like what's the word I'm looking for? I might try to bend it a little bit back on track to be a little bit more not friendly, but I basically don't want it to turn into trauma dumping, which like maybe I did like a little bit earlier, but I'm hoping I didn't. But so I have been trying to do a better job about this. I didn't do so great at it last stream because I was just so into what we were discussing with my girl Wanda Maximoff, but I'm trying to get back into the habit of setting limits for myself when I stream, like making sure I'm taking enough breaks, getting water, resting my voice, and I've sort of told myself that I was going to do that every 50 minutes if I could. So we are going to do a quick BRB. I know that's like kind of like a weird cutoff because I was just like, oh my god, let me read this article for you, or oh my god, let me pose this question about like pop culture mediums that you think represents mental health well, and I'm just like, okay, bye, you don't get to answer. But or I don't get to share my answer. But you know, I'm trying to be better about it because I really struggled with like a sore throat the other day from not resting myself and taking care of my voice, and like I don't want to do that again. So I'm gonna go get our water, maybe a snack, and I'll be right back. I did not mean for that to rhyme, but whatever. my god, that was so weird. Okay, so maybe it wasn't weird to anybody else. It was weird to me. I come back and like there's like basically no music, and I was just like, oh no, like did the playlist I was using, did it like crash? Did it like, like what's going on? It's like nope. It just has like a weird random, excuse me, patch of silence in it. And it's just like, okay, well, interesting creative choice, but hello, I'm back. I'm readjusting myself in my chair, so if you hear me moving around, that is why. I'm just trying to make myself more comfortable. But I had a cute little break. I got a little granola bar and I replaced my water, so we are good to go for another 50 minutes, I guess. So God, I can't believe I have to talk about mental health for another 50 minutes. Damn. No, but well, I'm trying to remember what I was talking about before. I think I was talking about well, actually, okay. So two things. Um, One, I wanted to sort of answer my own question earlier about sort of media that represents mental health, and I feel like is a good way, or at least is a way that resonates well with me. But two, I will say that the articles that I was looking at, I was closing out of the tab because I was just like, okay, I'm ready to put that subject to bed personally, because I'm scared of spreading misinformation. And I just like scroll and I see like nightmares and night terrors, and I'm just like, oh god, no. Um, I used to have night terrors like so much. Through honestly mostly college. I only had like a couple when I was a kid, at least that I remember, but then like college I just had like, because I think it was just tied to the fact that I had so much sleep paralysis in college in like a couple years sort of like post collegiate. I just, yeah, no, I just had like so many night terrors. And ooh, do I want to get spooky with them? Maybe a little bit, just very briefly. I think the one that I most commonly had was it was usually just related to like the curtains in my room. Like they just like sort of lift up and like dangle over me. I remember when I was describing it to my ex, it was just like, you know the scene in like Harry Potter or whatever where like they're in like Aragog's spider lair or whatever, and you see like those like webs dangling from the ceiling. He's like, no, I haven't seen Harry Potter. I'm just like, oh, okay, well it's like that. It's like, alright, cool. I haven't had that thankfully since 2019, so we love that for me. But nightmares are still a recurring thing. It's usually a lot of anxiety driven stuff, which is fun. I mean, it's a great way for me to like sort of like check in with myself and just like, okay, well, what am I actually stressed out with today that like I've been putting off? And it's usually related to that. And if it's not that, it's just like repeat like high school or just kind of school in general related trauma, but it's like, it's not even good trauma. It's like forgetting to do your assignment like the night before, and you're trying to like scramble to get it done in like study period right before class by the end of the day, and it's this full presentation. You're like, oh god, I don't remember what I'm talking about. And then like you realize it's a group assignment, so like the rest of your team is ready and they're just like, have you memorized your part? And you're just kind of like nodding and like faking it and be like, oh yeah, totally, like we got this like in the bag. And then like you don't even remember what class it is, so you're just like, what the fuck am I talking about? It's like that, like pretty frequently, which is like, I don't love personally. It's not great. But there are worse dreams. I have had worse dreams before. So I'm glad that the at least the common ones at this point in my life are just like, it's they're easy to shake off, because you're just like, oh, I haven't had to I haven't been in school in like so long, like this literally doesn't matter. And I have so much hindsight with me now to like know that like, just because you thought school was the biggest thing in the world, it really isn't. I mean, it's so important, obviously. That's not me advocating not giving a shit about school, but it's just like, it is, if you give too much a shit about school, Like that's not it's not healthy. Maybe don't derive your self-worth from doing well in school. That's like another thing that maybe therapist me would love to tell younger me, if I was in whatever reason a in position to do that. Um, but to answer and sort of pinball a little bit of representation, I guess, in media that I personally really like when it comes to representing mental health. Um, I think well, I might have said this on an earlier stream because I had sort of asked like a similar question. Um, this was a long while ago, I think. I think so I say the movie, but I know it. I know it's like based off of like a series beforehand. But I think A Silent Voice is like really um, visualizes anxiety and depression really well in like a very creative way. Um, I don't know how much credit to give Kyo Annie for that. If it was like already sort of pre-existent in like the source material, they just sort of animated it, or if this was something that was sort of like there was like a little bit of interpretation of the source material with it. But I think it's great. I think Hyouka does, which is like also from Kyo Annie, but it's also based off of a pre-existing work. Captures, in my opinion, captures anxiety really well. Like maybe I mean I think I related to like the story of Hyouka a lot because it's like it's about like a guy that like he's definitely struggling with like a lot of intellectual boredom. um where he's somebody that like he knows that he has like a lot of potential, but he doesn't feel like it's like there's like a reason for it to go anywhere. There's kind of like a little bit more to it than that, but like he starts sort of like people start recognizing and sort of bringing out his own like talents, and he becomes like more open with it. But then like the first time he's like really wrong about something, because it's like a sort of pseudo mystery of the week kind of format. um then he like absolutely just like starts spiraling, and it's just kind of like I related to a lot in the sense that just like this is like for me it's like this wasn't solving school mysteries or anything. This was like just being in school and like sort of if I didn't do well in a certain class or whatever, or like on an assignment, I'd be like questioning my own identity because I was a very dramatic high schooler. I related to a lot. I actually, so interestingly enough, though, I started it in high school, but I didn't actually finish it until college. Um, and that was because I didn't have anywhere to stream it. um, but eventually, I found a way in a completely, totally legal way. Obviously, actually, I did. It was I got it on. I watched the rest of it on High Dive, I believe. That's not sponsored, not an ad. Um, but Um, but those are like both anime. I think oh, you know what? I just sort of remember that I think I Am Not Okay With This, like the Netflix series, like also does that really well. Especially because it's like I appreciate that like okay, so when we look at like a lot of like let's be honest with ourselves. When we look at like a lot of stuff related to like depression or whatever, it's like it's not that it's like pretty or anything. Like there are plenty of examples where like depression is depicted pretty honestly. um but it like there is like kind of like a limit sort of like when it comes to like a range of what you can show and still keep a protagonist likable. um like you're only allowed to basically have one breakdown per season of like a show where if like a character is like really like really going through shit, then they like meet like you know they meet people that like they connect with, but then there's like that like third act um like sort of crossover where they get in like a fight or something, and like that's when you sort of start seeing them like regress again. To me, like that's I mean like you know it's a standard story format. I'm not gonna fault them for like doing that, but what I really appreciate about I Am Not Okay With This is that the main character Sid is like very cyclically kind of dealing with a lot of like um basically outbursts of like emotions. And I know it's like kind of it's very much a like a surrogate for discussing just like puberty in general with like mood swings, but like there is like a lot of like it is coded a lot with mental health, specifically with like um I mean, the way that the show sort of does it as opposed to the comic is like it sort of uses this like superpower that she can't control that's like very violent, um as like sort of related to like it's like kind of like a surrogate for like a genetic component to mental illness, sort of like depression with like the dad, but kind of manifesting into more ways with the main character. And I just like that it's just like this, like we're not gonna make mental illness like pretty in the show. We're not gonna make it aesthetic. Um we're not gonna make it easy. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate being able to show, I mean, like I kind of just in general like shows that let female protagonists specifically sort of process and exhibit emotions that lots of like people would like kind of dismiss as quote unquote difficult teenage emotions, or just difficult emotions in general, especially when there's like this, you know, the very sexist tinge on top of it that's like, oh, like women in their emotions, am I right, kind of deal. But being able to show somebody that's like, yes, you sympathize with them because they're going through significant traumatic loss, and then there's like also this genetic component behind it of like like very clearly, you know, there are other sort of issues that are going on at play whether they realize it or not. um but then like not not holding back not holding back on how destructive that can be, to like the people around you. Obviously, you know, the hope is that they do learn from that, which in the show she does. But I definitely would not want to watch a cycle of like a show where like somebody's being like completely toxic to everybody around them entirely, and then is like either forgiven for it or just like the story forgives them. Because then yeah, like that's not fun. But because you know people in real life that are like that. But but as somebody who's like depression doesn't always look like being sad, I really appreciated it. So those are shows anyway. Well, one is a movie, Silent Voice is a movie, Hyouka and I'm Not Okay with This are shows. um I guess I can probably say a book next. But I'm trying to think of what book I think really encapsulates that well, because I've read quite a few that are like not quite a few, as I haven't read like a ton of books. I'm not, sadly I'm not as like well read as some people would hope I'd be at this point in my life. um who I would say, ooh, this might be a little bit of a stretch, but it is the one that sort of like very much I mean, it's like the most recent book I've read, so it's the one that I'm going to think about the most. Um, but it's interesting to sort of view how mental health and kind of just like mental health in relationship to stigma is interpreted through through other cultures. I read a book called The Memory Police. It's not that's not like the title in Japanese, but that's like how it was like localized, because I guess it was more of like a catching title than the original, which is Crystallization. Um, but it basically follows. I'm gonna try to do like a better job at like at providing a synopsis for these, because I know I just threw out a Silent Voice and Hyouka. Um, but basically, in the book, there is an authoritarian regime that is sort of um, they're isolated on this island where things are mysteriously disappearing, like objects and like concepts, and it's a very surreal book. um but because people are forgetting stuff, the government is like sort of like um they're just like, okay, well, if this has been forgotten, then like we have to like absolutely we have to destroy it, and then like nobody can ever talk about this again. And it's sort of like a meditation on like collective grief, and what happens when people aren't allowed to articulate loss. And it's very esoteric in how it does it. It's like definitely not an easy read, and it also does not have a very happy ending. But I do think it is one of the more creative takes on grief, that I've seen, or read, I guess, in a bit. On top of just like the fact that it's like, I mean, like I love seeing what like dystopias sort of look like in from like other cultural perspectives. So I like that book a lot. I don't know if I can recommend it because it is kind of like a weird read. And I'm not sure how if I stand by some of the translation choices personally, but that's like a book that I think like a more accessible work, that I think talks about mental health in like a good way. Which I know people have I know people have mixed opinions about John Green, but I do think Turtles All the Way Down is like a pretty good book, mostly because it's just like I'd always sort of like called sort of my anxiety stuff like thought spirals, sort of privately to myself, but like seeing it like written down from the perspective, like the first person perspective of this character that deals with like a similar disorder to John Green, I'm just like, I don't know, it felt very validating. I don't really remember a lot of details about the book personally, outside of just feeling kind of seen in it. So that's probably not the best. That's probably not the best testament I can make for it. Or testimonial. Is that the word I'm looking for? Yeah, I think it's testimonial. It's not the greatest pitch. How about we'll say that? It's probably not the. It's. I'm so sorry, John Green is like not a great pitch for your book, but just know that I support it. I know that, you know, the community now post Tumblr feels very differently about John Green, but that's like an entirely different conversation though. And then music. Okay, so I saved music for last because I know that I could go super into it. I'm gonna try not to. That anybody who doesn't know me super personally, music is like a very, very, very big, very important thing to me personally, and like it's very much a part of my identity. And because of that, I do listen to music like almost constantly. And I mean, I feel like there's so many examples you can draw from of like people drawing from their own mental health struggles when they channel it into their music, because that's like kind of, I mean, musicians are kind of notoriously known for being very depressed and always writing about being depressed, but it's just like I get it. It's a way to sort of articulate your feelings in a cathartic way. And I mean, like I support people being able to like have a creative outlet to channel things into, but then like there's also the conversation to like, I mean, I'd be remiss not to talk about the sort of the self-feeding cycle that I think this kind of most artist communities like have a version of this, if not the same exact version. But you know, there's just like the whole trope of like the tortured artists that feels like they have to like sort of be like, I know Florence from Florence and the Machine described it as like a chaos machine, and a lot of people don't realize that they don't need to be they don't need to be miserable to make good music. Because I mean, like it's I know it's like such like a beat up topic at this point, but like when we think of artists who have left the world too soon, and how people really connect with like the, you know, their more emotionally raw and like honest works, you know, all of that's great, but the sad part about it is just like, you know, if they were able to get help and we had like a culture that supported it more, and granted, like we are seeing significant changes now with how we approach mental health and like sort of the conversations around it, and I think that's great, but it is sad to like know that there are like so many albums we don't get to hear, so many paintings we don't get to see, so many books we don't get to read because people um, weren't able to get the help that they needed. um, it's kind of as deep into it as I'm gonna get, because otherwise I'm gonna get too sad because I'm already thinking of like a couple artists that come to mind. Um, but I do hope that within like our generation we get to see the tortured artist fantasy be deconstructed more and sort of be done away with. Because like again, not that there's anything wrong with making music when you're sad. It's just like um, I mean, when we look at mental health and like the music industry, like in general, it's like it sucks, but I can understand where it like comes from. Because like there's so many pressures that I see artists having to like deal with. And, like touring is not something that everybody can do. There's like a lot of people struggle with a lack of structure. Um, when it comes to you know, off periods like in your life, and that sort of like feeds into like the it's like, okay, well I need to like fill my life with something. For some people that's like substance abuse, for some people it's um I'm trying to think of other self-destructive behaviors, but I guess I'll just leave it at that. There's just like there is like an element of like self-destruction in order to sort of not everybody does it because they want to find inspiration in that way, and that they're scared of not being able to make good music when they're not when they're not sad, basically. Um but that is a story that I hear about a lot. I'm glad more artists are sort of being upfront and honest about it, like many albums into their career, and being like, yeah, I made this during a very dark time, and while I'm glad that people resonate with this record so much, I'm glad that I'm not in that position anymore, and I hope I'm not ever in that place again, because that's very because that's very raw and very scary. I know that I mean, I sort of like alluded to her, well, not even alluded, I straight up referenced her already, but I think Florence Welch has like a lot of very interesting interviews and like insights about her life spanning across like the first three three yeah th- 3 or 4 like records with the band, and then like moving into um the album High as Hope, coming from a completely different um frame of mind from like the previous one, which very much was like super deep into self-destruction. um which like again, I love people being candid about it, because I think that's, I mean, this, I feel like that's definitely like an instance of like, not only am I glad that you're able to get out, but you're able to sort of like keep people from falling into that trap again, and sort of like help prepare them for um if they do sort of deal with that like it is possible to come out the other side and be okay. Because like I definitely would not um I would have been, I don't say this to like make it about me. It's just like, oh my god, that'd be like so inconvenient if they like died, or because that's like kind of a sick way to look at it. But like I don't know, I think about like sort of hearing after the fact of the stuff that she was dealing with, and like wondering if like, oh my god, like, you know, is there like another world um where things were different and things didn't work out the way that they did. And then sadly that's kind of like the reality for a lot of people, like in the present timeline, if there are more than one. I mean, that's a different video. That was the Multiverse of Madness video. Um but again, I said that I was like gonna stay away from like the the sadder stuff, so we're gonna move on with it before I get too deep into it. um but I will say, because like we were talking about music, I will say that I feel like listening to How Big, How Beautiful, wait, hello, let me say that again. How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful, back to back with like the next record, High as Hope, is like very, um, it is a very cathartic listen. because they're just recording two completely different like um, states of mind. And I think that's sort of like granted, I don't, it's not an easy listen because both of them are, well, I think High as Hope is like not a super long record in comparison, but um like How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful is a very long album, and it can be kind of slow. Um so I don't know that I can necessarily say like I recommend you actually sitting through those records back to back, but at least consider it. No, I'm just saying that like I think that that's sort of like a good um when we look at sort of the discussion of mental health. For me, I think that that's sort of like an immediate example musically that I can think of, but it is like a little bit of a stretch though. I will say that. Hi, do you mind if I call you Shooky? Or but hello. How are you doing today? I'm doing great, thank you. How are you? We're just talking about mental health. It's a mental health awareness month. If you didn't know. We are currently talking about what piece of media do you think represents a certain mental health issue in a way that is either like done just really well or was just like a way that really resonated with you. Um, Whether that's like a TV show, a movie, it can be a video game, it can be a book, it can be like whatever. I'm just interested to see what sort of um, what everybody like sort of vibes with, I guess, if that makes any sense. Um, Also, you have to let me know, just because I have my fan going on in the background because it is very hot. Let me know if it's too loud. I will turn it down. um, I haven't been able to check the audio levels for it from like a outside perspective. So, because like I know how things sound like in my head, because I'm me, but I never know how other people sort of feel about it. So just let me know if it's too loud and I can turn it down. It is very warm. I have granted it could be warmer. It's cooling down quite a bit, but I think in comparison to earlier today, just because like this is like the first day in so long because we just had like a very delayed spring that it was like in the 80s, which I love. But then I kind of remember that like, oh yeah, I'm going to be sitting in this room for like 2 hours at a time in front of like a mic with with it being kind of like pseudo insulated, so I gotta like stay hydrated and everything. No, it's fine. Okay, that's good. I think Pandora, Spotify. What do you mean? Um, what do you mean by Pandora, Spotify? Oh, is that like in relation to like the question that I asked? Um, because I said like media, not medium or service. Although that does make me like wonder then. So like, are you more like sort of music, um, geared when it comes to sort? Oh, I think that I connect with those the most. Oh, okay, yeah. Um, so then like my follow up question is like, so like what kind of music do you listen to then? I'm curious. I listen to kind of like a little bit of everything just because um I mean I get like I'm constantly listening to stuff just because that's just kind of how I was raised a little bit. So because of that, like when you don't want to listen to the same album a million times over and over again, which I'm still guilty of, but like I try to I try to mix it up a bit. You do end up kind of just being exposed to a little bit of everything. Um, but I will say I am trying to do better about not getting trapped into like the sad loop of of listening to like really sad stuff when I'm down, because sometimes it can be cathartic. It can sort of force out that cry that you've been like holding in a little bit. Breakup music does hit different when you're going through a breakup. I totally get it. But then I also kind of have to check in with myself and be like, oh my god, yeah, no, I can't be. I'm listening to this very depressing song, like a concerning amount. Maybe I should like actually go outside or something. Um, it might be like a little bit grim, but it's real. All I don't discriminate against anything. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Yeah, because I know like a lot of people are just like, oh, I'll listen to anything but country or I'll listen to anything but rap kind of deal, and just like, well, I feel like you can still find stuff within certain genres that you can like. Um, but that's cool though. Any albums recently that sort of, it doesn't even have to be like mental health related, but like anything that sort of like jumped out to you like specifically or anything. It doesn't even have to be a new release, just like whatever you're listening to. I do have a let's see if my command still works. It probably doesn't. Um we do have a playlist that updates semi regularly. This isn't what's playing like on stream. This is just a one that I sort of compile over time. I'm gonna try to. I usually try to update it kind of weekly, and then sort of do like a. Um, ooh, let's ignore like the random percent sign in front of it. I don't know why it's doing that, but but yeah, if you want to check it out, sort of like I try to keep a similar vibe for like every month. Like this month, it's very almost say kind of like house garage oriented a bit. Um, just because that's been like kind of in like the vibe that I've been, but like recently, but last month it was very like singer songwritery. So um, I try to like mix it up a bit and try to like stay on theme. But I'm terrible at making playlists. Um, I made this like I do this mostly for fun, but I know for it can be like it can be jarring for like the transition between like certain songs. I try my best, but it's not perfect. Well, like Eminem's Curtain Closed. Okay, you know what? I haven't actually listened to an Eminem record in so long. That kind of like reminds me. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to remember what song. Let me look it up, but because I know that I've heard it. I'm just trying to remember what songs are like on it. Because like I'm not necessarily an Eminem stan, um, so I don't know his discography super well. Okay, yeah, I remember very little of this. I'm looking at the date and I'm just like, oh, all right, that's why. I was a baby when this came out. I mean, I was a baby when like a lot of the records I listened to came out though. Like it doesn't mean anything. Because like I listened to like stuff from like the 90s when like I wasn't even like alive. But well, that's cool though. I know that he's been. I mean, he can get pretty real about certain stuff too. Um, because like I know he's like dealt with like a lot of like stuff in his own life. So that's cool. Um, yeah, sorry, somebody. I'm trying not to be, distracted streamer at the wheel, but I just got like, I just got like a weird string of spam texts. I don't know if anyone else has been like having this like this like issue of has anyone else like noticed like a rise in like spam text messages recently? Like I would get spam calls a lot, but I'm getting more texts recently, and I don't really know what's going on with that. It's like a little spooky. Um, how old are you? If you want to answer, of course. Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm 25. I actually just turned 25 a couple weeks ago. God, I'm getting old. No, 25's not even that old, to be honest. I mean, it would be to like teenage me, um, but for me right now, I still feel like an idiot that doesn't know anything. That's fine. Stupidity makes me young. It makes me feel young. It keeps me young. Oh, I don't know why the alert didn't play. I just noticed now, but thanks for the follow. OMG, I'm not even half. I'm like not even half your age. Sorry, my brain just like froze trying to like do math, but I'm just like, okay, I got it. I figured it out. All right. I was just like, wait, like up or down, like, but okay, yeah, I got it. I don't know why I like almost read it as like, oh my god, like I'm like twice your age or something. I'm just like, oh okay, but yeah. But god no, that just does make me feel super old. How dare you? I'm kidding. But welcome in, welcome in. I know you've been in for a bit, but like, but you know what I mean. Um, 12. All right. Yeah. So, all right. Well, then it's good that I've been like I've been like trying to keep this like stream relatively PG-13. I do cuss a little bit. I'm trying to be better about it, but I do cuss a bit. Um, but I've been trying to keep this stream like kind of accessible just because it's like a little bit more of like a broader topic, but like usually I'm a little bit more in the like the a little bit of the older category, but no, you're welcome in. Don't worry about it. Oh, you don't have to apologize for like being like in age. um Granted, I'm not sure what the age limit on like Twitch is or not. So like maybe I don't know. I don't know like the rules with it. No, you're fine. I do all the time. Oh, you mean cuss? Okay. All right, lit. Um, yeah. So I guess to keep sort of keep the conversation moving forward, I guess. Because I'm trying to be better about about budgeting my time a bit when it comes to like streams because I feel bad um when I keep people awake, I guess, because I don't live alone. Um, Something that I think is sort of really um, something that I think is sort of important to like talk about when we discuss mental health is definitely like sort of the overlap and like the intersections that mental health struggles have with marginalized communities. I I mean it's in my tags. Like I'm Asian, I'm gay. Um, there's like an intersection with that, with not only just what I deal with on like an everyday basis, but then like also kind of how that relates to like my mental health. Um, Obviously, nobody has to share their own identities or like their anything like about themselves. Like when I throw this out, that they don't feel comfortable with, it's like perfectly fine. I just wanted to sort of like open up the discussion to like kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to like a lot of people who fall under the queer umbrella is that um, that there is sort of like an element of collective trauma that lots of LGBTQ plus people face at some point in their life, and the thing is like even though it's like sort of a collective trauma, like it's still very individualized, because as long as there's like a closet and as long as there's like no real um there's no real structure or right way to come out, really, or like right time to come out, I guess. um but like people are all over the board when like it comes to like the closet, and obviously the the closet isn't the only source uh of like stress or like trauma for like a queer person. Obviously, I'm just kind of like opening up with this. If no, if you're not out, just know that like you are perfectly valid. Nobody should be forcing you to come out if you're not ready, if you're not in a safe place. Just know that you are loved. Know that it gets better. um God, I wish I was like, I wish I was sponsored or something. I'd completely throw out some like links in chat or something. I mean, I'll probably put them in like the YouTube description. I'll find some to like throw out. But OMG, so cool. I'm African and white mixed, bisexual though. I love that for you. Um, I don't know why I said it like that, but like, no, that's cool though. Um, it's very interesting for me to sort of like, just because so I'm sort of on like the cusp, I think technically between like millennial and Gen Z, but I'm definitely on the older I'd be like on the older side of Gen Z, probably more likely. Um and when I think about sort of the dialogues that I see happening around queer people at like when I was like 12 versus, well, 12, 13, whatever, um versus what Gen Z sort of like has, it is kind of interesting for me to like compare. It doesn't mean that things are like necessarily better, or I definitely wouldn't say that it's worse, but I could be wrong. Like I'm specifically talking about in like I mean, I live in the United States, so I recognize that, despite things being definitely not perfect here, and it's kind of scary for a lot of queer people, especially, people that are like trans or non-binary, um, in this country. I recognize that there are other places in the world that are still behind when it comes um, to LGBT rights, and so like I do have like an element of privilege when I sort of discuss like what younger generations. I hate that I can say younger generations at this point now, because then I have to acknowledge that I'm like no longer the baby of like my friend group anymore. Um, but it is interesting because like I think on one hand it's like great to see like so many more young people feel empowered enough to be their authentic selves in whatever way that may be. There's a lot more spaces for them to find communities, specifically like online. I know that the high school that I went to, there was like very few openly LGBT people at that school when I was still around, but like now that I've like graduated, it's like a very supposedly queer friendly, very queer positive environment that I wish I could have had when I was growing up. But it's fine. I'm not bitter about it at all. I think that's great for everybody there. Um, so I want to look at that and be like, okay, that means that we're seeing like a lot of like great change. But then I think about like, well, there are still communities like within this country that still sort of like struggle with that. Obviously, a lot of these things don't end up like not extending out to trans and non-binary students, who still on like a daily basis have their rights being thrown into questions. I recognize also as like a gay man that the prejudice that I would be experiencing as a gay man is very different than if I was like a lesbian. Um, so there's lots of different things to sort of take into consideration, and then on top of the fact, like there is a part of me that sort of wonders with sort of the ubiquitous nature of social media, and being able to see more openly queer representation in like the world around you. Can that make it feel more isolating for somebody who like isn't ready to come out, or isn't in a place where they feel safe coming out, or is just like still figuring stuff out? Because I imagine there's like sort of a level of comparative anxiety that comes with that too, because like you're sort of you see this like very confident and comfortable person with like their sexuality or like their gender identity. You might see somebody like, for example, if you're somebody who's like closeted and like trans, for example, like would it be actually more of a detriment to see somebody who like is out and like passes really well, for example, um, and is able to like live a life that that you're not quite where you want to be at yet. And I'd imagine that that can be really psychologically damaging. And it's obviously not the other person's fault, like inherently for living their living their best life in like the best way that they can. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't sort of weigh on people who like aren't there yet for any number of reasons. So it is kind of like it's a double-edged sword in that sense. I think ultimately I like that we're able to see younger people sort of start to push more for normalizing queer subjects, and that there's like a much bigger push now to like not leave the trans community behind. um because like I definitely know with like with the queer movements that I grew up with in like middle school and high school, most people did not know what like being transgender was at all, and like were really only focusing on like gays and lesbians. Honestly, a lot of them didn't even like acknowledge people who are bi, which I think is like incredibly frustrating. Bisexual erasure is not okay. We do not stand by erasure on this channel. Thank you very much. Um, I mean, there still is racism and hate towards LGBT people. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I'm definitely not trying to like imply that like, oh, things are so good now. Like, homophobia is over, transphobia is over. It's like no, like there's still very much a thing. I just sort of like wonder if like the environment has become more friendly for at least people to sort of not feel as isolated, if that makes any sense. Because like for me, for example, I didn't grow up with like a lot of openly gay people in my community around me. I live in like a small town. I went to like a smaller school that only had like two other gay people, and I'm just like, okay, well, I guess these are my only romantic options, and I don't really I'm not really a fan of either of them. Um and even if I didn't consider myself like really that closeted, or I don't really know that I had that same kind of experience as like other people did. It's like I still sort of dealt with um the ramifications of being very isolated and not being in like a connected community, I guess, that could help me grow and learn about certain things um as I got older, until I got older, I mean. And it just makes me I do wonder if like, um I love the amount of resources that young people have now, and there's like a lot more visibility for certain groups. Definitely not a lot of people knew what asexuality was in high school either. They would just say you're like a prude or something, and it's just like, no, it's very much a thing. Asexuality is like a thing. It's not the same as aromanticism. Like, there just wasn't that kind of level of dialogue that was happening around me. But I feel like now I see queer TikToks all the time that are explaining so many new things to me, and I just think that's great. And it's like coming from people like within those communities directly, instead of having a keynote speaker talk at me um in like the one like pride day that we'd have at my school, and that only happened like my last year of high school, was that they just started to do that for quote unquote diversity day. And the entire time like my classmates were just complaining about it. I'm just like, oh my god, like I'm just kind of like, yeah, maybe I waited this long to come out because I knew that like this was the warm reception that I'd be getting. But you do bring up like another good point about that, is just like that like racism against like the LGBT community, and also within the LGBT community, is definitely a thing, because we see definitely I think I hate to say it like this because I don't want to get like, too heavy in like that discussion per se. But when we look at representation in queer media, when it comes to I mean, just like gay people in general, or just LGBT people like entirely, it does tend to be more whitewashed, I guess. And then like by as a like a result of that, I'm so sorry I have to go to bed. No, totally. Yeah, no. See you tomorrow, hopefully. So I stream Mondays, Wednesdays, and sometimes Fridays. I probably won't stream tomorrow. And the only reason I'm streaming tonight is because I sort of had to call out yesterday because I wasn't feeling well. Um, but yeah, I stream Mondays, Wednesdays, and sometimes Fridays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. So um, if you want to come by on Monday, I'm not sure what we'll be talking about, but totally feel free to come through. Thanks for following and thanks for chatting with me for the short time. But definitely get some sleep. It's oh my god, I don't know what time zone you're in, but if you're in mine, it is very late. But have a good night, buddy. Um, but yeah, it's just like because it is like a very often a white centric in like a lot of ways. Like I know, for example, like I know like one of my friends who's black is like asexual, and he's like sort of pointing out it's just like it feels like whenever I see like a post that's like talking about like, oh my god, these shows have great ace representation, it's just like, why do none of these characters look like me? Like it's great that they exist, but the after effect of a lot of these identities only being shown through like the lens of like cis white people is that it does make you feel pretty alone, and it's just like, representation is great, but you have to understand that LGBT people like exist in these spaces as well, and like oftentimes are very very influential in these spaces as well. I mean, like we wouldn't have had like the Stonewall riots if not for the black community, specifically like the black trans community. Point blank period. Also, fair point for next time I'm a girl. Okay, cool. Yeah, I should. Oh, yeah, yeah. That reminds me that like every time somebody new comes in, I mean to ask for everybody's pronouns. I'm hoping I didn't misgender you. I think I said buddy, but that was it. But yeah, definitely. That does remind me though to like ask people for like their pronouns when they come in if they feel comfortable sharing. Um, 10:30. Okay, so you're about like an hour behind me. Um, but okay, thanks for. Oh wait, so also, how do you want me to refer to you though, like name wise? Do you want me to do Shooky? Is like Shooky okay, or is Hooky? I don't know, let me know which one is um which one is like cool with you. And I'll remember it next time. I'm trying to be better at remembering people's names. It's just sometimes they're long, so I'm just like but have a good night. Thanks for coming through. I appreciate it. Yeah, hopefully I'll see you on Monday. I still don't know what we'll be talking about, but we'll see. um but yeah, and then like sort of the continued offshoot of that, when you sort of um when you whitewash queerness, is that like you eliminate discussions like around like the mental health around like communities of color as well, specifically like in queer communities. But I mean, I will overall like note that like when it does come to discussing mental health, there a lot of the times within, like, I hate to say it, like within our own communities, um in BIPOC spaces, that like not every community is great about talking about mental health. There are lots of people that are still very old fashioned when it comes to it. Some people will straight up say that it's like a white thing to be talking about anxiety and depression. A lot of people don't take it seriously, and think it's like a little bit part of like snowflake culture. Like there's still plenty of people that are very conservative um, when it comes to talking about mental health. And yes, it is. I don't even know honestly pronounce it. However, okay, I'll say shook. Is like shook okay? Shook or shooky? You can tell me which one you prefer. Um, but But again, oh my god, get some sleep. It's like it's like 10:30. Um, but have a great night. But yeah, it is a shame because it's just like, granted, like this isn't me telling writers and directors out there to be like, no, I only want to see like um only show me queer trauma, only show me queer mental health struggles, but like make it inclusive. Like it's like that's not like necessarily what I'm getting at. It would be nice to see more um I mean, more Asian gays being depressed on screen. That'd be nice, um, but like there is like a balance that does come around with like how we want to show media, related to mental illness, because especially when it's coming from if it's coming from people that are really only looking at it from like a clinical perspective and not really sort of they don't really have that personal connection with it, especially oh my god, especially if it's like a straight cis director that's like making a movie that's all about queer trauma. It does kind of rub me the wrong way a bit. Like I don't know if that's like kind of picky. I guess this is sort of segued into like discussing representation in media surrounding mental health, but I know that I said I wasn't going to be talking about bad examples, so I won't name any specifically. 13 reasons, but um, but I don't know. It's just like because of like how whitewashed a lot of like queer media can be like in general. When we only show when we only show white people like struggling with like the closet, like it does feel like a little bit um or can feel a little bit alienating, if that makes any sense. And it's just like it doesn't mean that we can't ever relate to like the experience of like um these characters, because like I mean we've had to like relate to these characters for things other than appearance for the past several decades at this point, because like we were never we never like expected to like see ourselves on screen, and like seeing a gay person on screen like in general was like a godsend for some of us who have been like starved for queer content for so long. um so it was just kind of like, okay, well I won't be picky. but um but like now that there's we have more we have like a lot more transparency and a lot more open lines of communication with creators, it's kind of just like I don't want to say that there's like less excuses not to do it, because it's just like, no, I get it, there's like lots of financial things to take into consideration. And if you're like what's really sad is that like I mean queer stuff very rarely gets to be pushed overseas from like Western markets, so financiers are like very much taking into consideration that like China, for example, is like literally one of like the biggest consumers of Western films in the world. So it is like very much a lucrative market. And if you're not playing by if you're not playing by the government's game when it comes to what's allowed and what isn't allowed, then like you're not going to get pushed overseas, or you're going to have to make pretty significant changes. That does mean that like a lot of queer films is going to be films are, excuse me, are not going to get picked up, let alone if you wanted to like talk about mental health on top of it. um but I also don't want it to come off with like me saying that like the only queer films that I'm like really wanting are like queer trauma, because it's just like, no, we have plenty of those, thank you very much. I would still love to see some from like the perspectives of like people who are like you know I keep saying BIPOC, but I know it's like BIPOC or just BIPOC. But I know for even some people that like can be like a little bit misleading, but it stands for like not bisexual. See, this is why it's confusing, and like can be misleading, because it can come off as just saying like bisexual people of color, but it's like Black, Indigenous people of color. I know some people are like sort of split on the term, but it just sort of like highlights that like the experiences of like Black and Indigenous people of color, as opposed to just like the greater umbrella of people of color like are going to be experiencing categorically different things than like an Asian person, for example. So even though we're still not white, it's
for a lot of people there is kind of an importance within that distinction, to say that like, hey, you know, when we're talking about it, like when we're using an umbrella term for people who aren't white, that we still need to like acknowledge that there is sort of um, there's a range of experiences that are very different, and we have to like acknowledge that the experiences that Black Indigenous people experience when it comes to racism is like different and in a lot of ways worse. So so that's why I say it instead of just saying people of color. If I slip into it, like I'm sorry, I'm learning, but that's why I say it. It doesn't stand for bisexual people of color, even though like obviously they exist. But I just get that it's like confusing to just say bi POC, but it's either that or I say BIPOC, and I feel like BIPOC maybe sounds a little bit weirder. I don't know. That's just me though. We got super off track with that. Um, just sort of like reeling it back in, you know. But yeah, I would love to see sort of like I hate to say I'd love to see more depressed Asians, but like in movies, but like maybe um I don't know. It's just because like eventually it does sort of start to weigh on you a little bit um when you have like other friends who are like more in like more conservative communities when it comes to talking about mental health, that like um that it is just seen as like a quote unquote trivial white thing or whatever. And just like, no, mental health is a thing that like everybody deals with. I feel like if you're a person of color in this country, specifically if you're like a Black person in this country, it's hard not to like have at some point a struggle with like mental health a bit. I feel like every time there's like been like a major shooting, for example, not to get too into it, or maybe maybe this is the point where I throw out like the trigger warning for stream. We're gonna get like a little bit heavier with this. I don't want to get too heavy because again I want this to be accessible, but like we are going to talk about going to talk about sort of the more not extreme, but like I definitely like a kind of like a darker part of mental health. We just won't be too explicit with it, mostly because I don't know what I'm allowed to say on Twitch or not when it comes to it. But I just think that I mean, whenever mental health does come into the conversation, I know that I said like in the beginning of stream that like I think it's important to emphasize that it's, you know, that it's ultimately very much a spectrum. Not everybody's going to be falling on like the extreme end of like this person like is in crisis mode, they are like in danger to themselves or others kind of like situation. You know, not everybody's like on that end, and like the people that are sort of in the middle um deserve to be able to check in with themselves, like, and not feel like they're gatekeeping themselves out of mental health care because they think other people have it worse. You know, I just want to throw that again as a disclaimer from earlier. But in this part of the of the stream, this is sort of what we're more gearing towards. Again, gonna keep the conversation relatively safer for it, but I'm still probably gonna mark this with like a trigger warning in when I do like the timestamps on YouTube later, for this being like a little bit more of discussing like self-harm and suicide, or at least alluding to it. Again, not getting super into it, but I do have to acknowledge that when I look at the communities that are disproportionately affected from like a mental health standpoint, kind of just like in general, but like especially through the pandemic, it is a lot of LGBTQ plus people, specifically people in the trans community, trans and non-binary people during the pandemic have had to deal with, I mean, so much shit. A lot of people like are like sort of forced back in the closet if they're like if they're students and they have to move back home. That already sort of started finding their communities more when they were away at school. Maybe they moved away in order to like find a better community, but have to go back home. And they're living in a space that doesn't make them feel welcome, or maybe they're having an issue with like when like essential healthcare was like no longer well, let me rephrase that. When essential healthcare was sort of like the only thing that you were able to be like seen for, and a lot of people's like treatments that they had planned to get done sort of got put to like a halt. These are all things that weigh heavily on like your mental health, and it's sad to say that over the course of the pandemic that like we have seen rates of deaths sort of peak for the trans community, and it's why it's so important that like you know that I as like a gay person sort of have to not only like acknowledge my privilege as like somebody who's like seen as like that is allowed more visibility because gayness has been seen as like more quote unquote approachable than like being trans, is to recognize that like it is part of my role as like somebody who has directly benefited from the efforts of like the trans community for the rights that I have, even if they are like constantly in question right now, because this country is fucking terrifying. That like it is important to like stand with people, stand with the trans community. So this will be one of many times that I say it, obviously, but trans rights are human rights. Respect pronouns. It costs $0 to not be an asshole, and respect somebody's pronouns. So just throwing it out there. But it's just like it's something that's so it's hard not to feel very very heavy about it, if that makes any sense. When we think about how like, even though I struggle a lot with like depression and anxiety, and sort of am constantly telling myself that like just because other people have it worse doesn't mean that you don't deserve to give yourself sort of like attention, or that like your issues don't matter. You do also have to occasionally give yourself that reality check, and understands the specificity of this kind of situation. Queer people in general have definitely been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, especially when like if anybody that has to go back into the closet, as like somebody who had to go back into the closet when I was overseas for like half a year, that's like not fun. I can't, but I was like within I at least had people within like my immediate vicinity that like I could be open around. Like I was living with my partner at the time, so I was still relatively fortunate. I can't really imagine what it's like to be like a young person, in this day and age where you see constantly on social media people being out and proud and saying live your best life, live your truth, bestie, and not being able to do that because of this like shitty situation you've been put in that's been super unfair. And that like totally sucks. It's very interesting sort of to look at in hindsight with sort of the stories that I grew up with when it came to sort of the I'll say it again. I don't know how many times I'm allowed to say like the word on Twitch, but when we look at suicide rates for LGBT people, when I think about the environment that I grew up with, where early days of like the internet, you just think of like those big stories, I guess, of like videos sort of videos or posts on like MySpace or YouTube at a time, which is like very very unreal for me to think about, I guess. Is that I do wish that like these people were able to sort of see what the internet was like now, I guess. Obviously there's still very shitty, very homophobic, very transphobic people on the internet that make people's lives a living hell, and they totally suck for that, obviously. But and there are definitely elements of the internet that have gotten scarier and more intimidating as it's developed. um it is hard not to think about like um if you were able to really tell this person that things were going to be um I hate to say it because it's like so it was a thing that was like said to you so many times in middle school and high school. And it's like it's like so overdone at this point, but it's like it does get better. um I mean, that's when like the ooh, hello, uh-oh, sorry, I just saw that my mic, there's like a ring around my direct input box for my mic, and it just turned red, and I'm like, I'm really hoping that doesn't mean I just like peaked somebody's audio and like hurt your ears. I am so sorry if that happened. um but oh god, what was I saying? I don't know. I think it's nice, it is nice to see like have like the hindsight, I guess, and like to see like the progress that we've come when it does come to talking about mental health specifically like within the queer community. But obviously we still have a long way to go. um there's still lots of people we still need to look out for. Sadly, it feels like a lot in like a lot of occasions throughout queer history that the trans community and the non-binary community have been left behind whenever there's been like a major win for LGBT rights. um, and that happens for a number of factors, I think. Of a lot, I think like there is an element of it that is like very internal with like people within the community not standing up for each other, which I think sucks. I think we all have to do a better job at. But it's I will say this is probably, so we're gonna lean a little bit out of the trigger wording territory a little bit, and sort of more into like the maybe like the fun, hopeful aspects of it a little bit. um Obviously there are still raging homophobes and transphobes that have platforms. um like today, like they're like celebrities, and which is like super gross, and like we see all these people having like way too much power over these communities that like totally sucks. But it's like also very nice to know that there's like I mean there's like allyship is like almost always kind of expected from uh like a lot of celebrities at this point. To the point where like if you're Chris Pratt and you have like the potential of being involved with the church that's very historically been very anti-LGBT, even if you haven't outwardly like said that you're anti-LGBT, which I'm just kind of like, I don't want to manifest slander. Please don't come at me, Chris Pratt's team. But it is sort of interesting to see the contrast when like, because like the flip side is just like I think of like, I mean for the 20th century, like a big, like there were queer icons, but they were like monoliths, like it was like Madonna, it was like Prince, it was um oh god, I want to say Cyndi Lauper. But then like specifically with like my generation, it was like I mean Lady Gaga was definitely like a probably one of the biggest ones. um Katy Perry too, Katy Perry is really funny because then it's just like she's like also has history being like very problematic, because like there's like the whole history behind like, I Kissed a Girl, with like queer baiting and sort of fetishizing lesbianism and bisexuality and bi-curiousness. And then there's also I mean her her big debut, that I feel like a lot of people forget, was a song called "You're So Gay," that references like harming yourself, which is not great. um, then there was that period of like time in like the late 2000s, early 2010s that like really did have like the major push for love yourself songs. I mean, granted, we still have plenty of love yourself songs now, and I obviously think that's great. We love a pump up playlist when like you're feeling down. I remember I was like I was I'm not really sure what I was going through. I remember telling my friend Jerry that I was like, hey, do you have like a playlist you could send me to like sort of get me through something? Like, I don't really want to talk about it. I just want to listen to something funny. He's just like, bet, I got you. And it's just like this full. I mean, it's a testament to it. It's just like it's okay to like have songs that like lift you up, and like have playlists for it, even if like somebody might go through your phone and see it and be like, oh my god, are you okay? You have like this like entire playlist that's just a list of affirmations. I'm just like, I'm doing great, thank you, I'm thriving. um but it is interesting to see sort of the I think lyrically there's been a shift with self-love anthems. I think as we've seen like a little bit more of a well, I mean, we've all I want to rephrase this because it's just like, I mean, black culture has always been co-opted in popular culture. So like it shouldn't be surprising that that a lot of like the pop girlies who are writing more self-love anthems now, there are like quite a few of them that kind of attempt to like, is this too spicy of a conversation? I was gonna say that like there are like some where like their self-confidence anthems like are maybe co-opting black culture and like emulating black women a little bit too much for me. um that might be too spicy for tonight's stream. This is about uplifting people. We shouldn't be calling out problematic pop girlies. um but I think it's overall good that we're seeing people that are like much more I don't want to say casual about discussing mental health and self-love in like their work, but like almost kind of. I mean, I like the amount of songs I've like pop songs I've heard over like the past couple of years that like that mention therapy in it, but it's like not making fun of therapy, I think is great. Because I remember in like the only representations of like therapy that I'd see like on screen or well, actually, yeah, it was like pretty much only on screen, would be sort of like that bit of like a guy sitting on a couch or whatever. He's like usually like a he's either like an early post-collegiate white dude, or he's like a down on his luck like dad or whatever, just like sitting in like the stereotypical like therapist chair and being like, why is life so hard? Get a deal. And it's like it's like usually played as like a joke. So like seeing therapy being presented and like for example, I feel like the show Never Ever Ever, I mean, it's definitely not a non-problematic show, but I love how casually integrated her therapy sessions are into like the rest of the show's narrative. And I feel like it actually provides like a lot of helpful insight for people who are like the same age of like the main character that they might be dealing with. Well, in her case specifically, it's with grief, but also anger management. But it can be kind of just like a variety of things. And then like I also think about granted, this is a very dark movie, but The Fallout also has like a very, in my opinion, a very great representation of therapy. Also Euphoria. Okay, so Euphoria is problematic in a lot of ways, and it's definitely not I would not call it the peak of media representation when it comes to mental health. Like, not at all. But I do like the special episode that Hunter Schafer co-wrote, where she's talking with a therapist, and is like sort of unpacking the events of season one and then some. And it's like, even though this is like a fictional character with like a fictional backstory, and like none of this is real, it's just like it still felt very. I mean, it felt real. It was like, in my opinion, that was like a very well written sort of exploration of like a therapy session with like this character. And I don't know, I just love that we're seeing, not only are we seeing like more just like therapy sessions, but like notice that like all of like the examples I just listed like involve like women. And then like before, it was just like, if I ever talked about therapy, it's played as a joke, and it's like a guy going to therapy, and it's like treated like it's like a joke, and it's an emasculating experience, when it's just like, and it's like usually played as a gag, and it's like, no, like therapy is for everybody, you know. Everybody deserves to like be able to process their emotions and how they're coping with life through through an extra channel. If it were up to me, like, I wouldn't say therapy is free, because it's like, well, actually no, I'll say that if it were up to me and it meant that the therapists were paid very well and that they weren't stressed out with clientele, which I don't know that in this scenario that's necessarily the case, then like, yeah, therapy would be free. I think everybody should have access to it if they like choose to see it. And I know that there's lots of communities where that's like still very stigmatized. Like me saying that therapy is like getting presented or represented better in popular media does not mean that like therapy is being overall more respected. But like, when I don't know, when I hear therapy being referenced in an Olivia Rodrigo song, I'm just kind of like, this is very different than like what other Disney stars like her age, like when I was growing up, would have been talking about. It is also so wild to look back on. This feels especially topical, even though Britney has been free for a little while now. But I remember when everybody was talking about when Britney shaved her head or whatever, and God, there's people that are being so awful about it. And I'm just like, she clearly like, this is a cry for help. I mean, I know that she said that it was like sort of more of like a reclamation of like her image. I believe that's what I read, and it was sort of collapsing a bit underneath like the pressures of like how she's supposed to look, and like, I can't imagine what it's like to be, well, like, one, being the public eye like at that young of an age, but then two, to like have a lot of your value being put into like your physical appearance and being a sex symbol, but then like also being like, if you're a sex symbol, does that make you like a slut? Does that make you like X, Y, and Z? And it was just awful. So I'm just like thinking of like all these pressures. I'm just like, why are y'all being so mean to her? Like, what? And I just think about how differently we see it now. If like somebody, like, for example, goes to rehab, now it's like, I feel like it's taken more seriously. I don't know that I can speak for like every internet space, because I know there are definitely people that are still shitty about it on Twitter, but like, I feel like if Britney shaved her head like now, people like the dialogue around it would be like objectively different. I feel like that's like not a hot take, or that's like not too far out for me to say. And I feel like it's because the dialogue around it has become like, it's easier to reclaim it, because it's not just like tabloids that are like relaying this information to you and then it being spread and like discussed about through like only that lens. Like, now Britney would have more say in it. It's like, we no longer have to rely on people who are trying to frame a story a specific way to provide that kind of information. It just comes from you directly, or at the very least your team. And I think on top of that, it's just like our perceptions of like celebrities have like shifted. Sometimes maybe not for like the better. I think parasocial relationships through social media can be very harmful, and that when people think that they have more access into your life because you're updating them with like, your hourly thoughts or whatever on Twitter, or you like watch their daily vlogs, or you watch them on Twitch all the time, that like um you assume you know more about them you do, and that you assume that you um are closer to them than like you actually are. um then like, yeah, there's still like negative elements of people relating to celebrities, maybe a little bit too much, but I still think being able to like sort of see people more as people instead of like monoliths like has changed because of the how social media lets celebrities be more active in like their own image. Granted, there are still plenty of people that like we think run their own Twitter accounts, but they definitely do not. um in that that whole deal. um but it's just cool. I hate to gauge sort of the the progress we've made when it comes to at least like discussing it on like the main stage, based like solely through like pop culture. But like I wouldn't say it means nothing though either. Obviously, it's not the end all be all, because like if you're living in more, I mean, this is still like a thing that everybody or that anybody can deal with, and like still experiences a lot of shame around, especially if you're like, if you're a dude. um like toxic masculinity is like not cute, especially when it comes to not wanting to seek mental health, or not wanting to reach out to people, not seek mental health, seek mental health care. um and or at the very least like even just like reach out to other people. Sadly, that has become like a very, for whatever reason, gendered experience. But I'm hoping I get to see that change a lot more. I have seen it change a little bit, because like soft boys, quote unquote, and sad boys are like um are at least aesthetic now. They may not be popular, but they're aesthetic. That's like, okay, well, that's like kind of a step in the right direction. If you go down it a little bit too far, it can turn into like maybe fetishizing depression a little bit, which I don't love. And that's kind of like another um sort of jumping off point you could go with about just like the dangers of maybe being like a little bit too glib about mental health, which I kind of go back and forth on a lot, because like as much as I'm like very much I get like concerned when people sort of co-opt mental health as like an aesthetic, that can like deal like harm as well. At the same time, I'm just like, I love depression memes, I love anxiety memes, and like I don't want them to go away just because I've said that like I don't like um I don't like maybe our experiences being fetishized a little bit, with like depression being an aesthetic in like the early 2010s, because Tumblr was like all over that. um and sort of like the long-term harm that can maybe deal um when it comes to like people getting help. um and then it kind of opens up like the other discussion of just like, who am I to gatekeep somebody else's like expression for like their mental health, or even like their own diagnoses, because I'm not a professional. I'm not going to be the one to tell you like you're not actually depressed. Like that'd be so shitty. It'd be like, oh no, you have to be this anxious to be like have anxiety disorder, you know. um like, do I think sometimes the words get like crossed a lot when like we discuss it? Like, yes, of course, like not everybody who is like depressed is like depressed, but like does that mean that I'm gonna be the one to make that call every time? Absolutely not. Like, you never know when like somebody's um like actually kind of like serious about something. It's why like I'm kind of like against people joking about like, quote unquote, wait, I don't always say quote unquote. It's why I don't love when people joke about like self-harm, um or like offing themselves or something, because that's a little bit, that hits a little bit too close to home to me. personally, that like I'll never be able to really find that like a fun kind of statement, but um like that part I'll probably be like a little bit more stern about, um but otherwise it's just like I do it's like I do love my memes, so like it does put I am like in a difficult position with that, especially because like I am also somebody that like that does like to joke through some of like the less fun aspects of like my mental health, because that's just kind of how like I cope with things. And like as much as I like that and I feel like it can inform my sense of humor a bit, I have to sort of also maybe acknowledge that there's like, am I part of the problem? Am I sort of, is me maybe thinking I'm destigmatizing mental health actually defanging it a bit, maybe like too much, or maybe is that even a bad thing? I don't know, I'm not the authority on that. And it's just kind of about like being aware when you can, and also just be receptive to like criticisms that like somebody might have about you, because maybe I joke about something that's like a little bit too real for somebody else, and they tell me like, hey, like that's not actually that's not as amusing to me as it is to you. It just kind of having to acknowledge that and be an active listener, I guess, because like even as somebody who's like, I mean, like, I'm not the voice of depression. I'm not like I'm not the poster boy of it. I'm not like what was in like a BoJack Horseman, the new face of depression. I'm not here to be a mental illness mascot. I'm just here to be a fucking person, which is like not always easy or fun, but that's that's life. That's like maybe a little bit of of like a depressing note to sort of leave off on. I'm hoping it's not, but I am noticing that we're about to hit the 2.5 hour mile mark. Mile mark, hello. Minute mark, I guess. I don't know. This has been a interesting stream. I think hmm, I definitely feel bad about fucking up the intro because of seeing that my mic was having problems. But then, like, again, I'm gonna go back and edit it, and it's gonna sound fine. And I just need to like trust my instincts a little bit better. But we'll see. But again, thank you to everybody who came through tonight and listened to me talk about mental health. I hope it didn't come off as too whiny or like talking about myself too much. It was just kind of, I tried to keep like a little bit of a balance of it, I think overall. Um, I'm also noticing that like the music cut out quite a bit throughout the stream. I'm not really sure why. Um, I'm sorry if this becomes like a less entertaining stream because of that, but I'm hoping me in like the obviously the soothing sound of my voice was able to get you through it tonight. um as far as next week is concerned, because I'm not streaming tomorrow. I don't really like streaming back to back Thursday and Fridays. If I do stream tomorrow night, it'll probably be like a short gaming one, and I don't really have a topic prepared for it. But as far as next week is concerned, I'll stream on Monday. I don't know what yet. I'll I'll tweet about it or post it on Instagram, and like you'll know what it is. I need to like update the my socials on here as well, because like because I don't use this Twitter account, and I don't use that Instagram. I should just put my personal accounts on. I just like I was like nervous about doing it at first because I'm just like, well, one, like I wanted to have like an account that was like, no, this is like official and it like has like the actual name of the podcast on it. But I'm just like, okay, but if I'm not updating it, it's kind of just sending somebody to like nowhere. Um, and I don't feel great about it. So like at some point I will update the socials tab. I'm just lazy and forgetful, I guess. Um, this so ooh, actually, you know what? Tomorrow is actually a little bit of a busier day for me, so I'm not sure if this upload's gonna come up on, well, I guess technically it is Friday now. Normally I do, you know, like the day after I record an episode is when I post it, but I think this one might take a bit. Normally I do it like noon the next day, but this one might take a bit just because um there's some issues that I gotta like sort through first, but I could be wrong. It might be up by tomorrow. It just might not be not hello. Might not be up at like the normal time. I don't think that's gonna bother anybody though, because I mean the past several uploads have been kind of out of sync, and like again, I'm also not streaming on a day I normally stream. Um, I'm glad that I waited to stream this. It took so many tries because I know that like the first stream of the month I wanted it to be this, and then um and then Streamlabs refused to work. So I'm glad it opened up today. I'm also glad it cooled down as the night went on. I have my fan on again. I'm really hoping it's not too loud and that it didn't sort of over stress out the mic or the audio or anything. But it seems like it was okay. I guess I'll know for sure when I edit this later. But um, but I hope everybody has a great night. I guess have a great weekend as well, because I'm not going to be back. But um, as a reminder, if you're watching this in the future, I stream Mondays, Wednesdays, and sometimes Fridays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/Squirrel Next Door Podcast. Um, is there anything else? I always mess up the outro. Maybe this is my official outro at this point. I don't know. But thanks for everybody who came through. Thank you for the follows. I'm still not sure why my follower alerts aren't working, but um but I mean, like, what else is new? This is like constantly a scuffed stream. um but I'll talk to you all next time. Bye.